Hello and thank you for checking out this video. Before we start, we want to remind you that we have a channel membership where you can access an exclusive video every month. We're also going to use half the money to fund genetic genealogy research on a cold case and hopefully get it solved. So when you sign up for a membership, you'll be supporting this channel and you'll also be helping solve a cold case. You can find out more about the membership by clicking on the link in the description box below this video. I don't know about you, but I get the winter blahs around this time. It is miserable outside and I'm bored from being cooped up all day. That's why I'm thankful for the thrills I get from playing Hard Rock Neverland Casino, who is today's sponsor. It's the ultimate casino experience right on your phone. It's fun and exciting and free to download and play. There are over 100 slot games, including Hard Rock's iconic memorabilia and other popular slots found in the world's best casinos like Golden Buffalo, Pirate's Fortune, and Wild Spins. Hard Rock Neverland Casino's graphics are beautiful. What I found impressive is that even with these amazing graphics, the gameplay is smooth and seamless. I make sure I play every day because they offer daily bonuses such as free spins, coins, and other amazing rewards. And how does $1 million sound? Right now, Hard Rock Neverland Casino is running $1 million giveaway. There are other amazing prizes like thousands in cash and exclusive Hard Rock merchandise. For your chance to win these amazing prizes, all you have to do is play. You'll get a $2 million coin bonus when you sign up. So why not play an incredibly fun casino game and possibly win some amazing prizes, including $1 million. Join me by downloading Hard Rock Neverland Casino app right now. After all, you could win the $1 million cash giveaway, some awesome Hard Rock swag, and more. To get this amazing, free to download game, click on the link in the description. We want to say a big thank you to Hard Rock Neverland Casino for sponsoring this video. Number 3. Collins Jumaisi, Khalusha. Kenya is a country in East Africa that's home to over 47 million people. Its largest and most populous city is the capital, Nairobi. On July 7, 2024, a horrifying discovery was made in an abandoned quarry in one of the city's slums. The quarry was searched because a relative of 26-year-old Josephina Wino, who was missing, had a dream that her body was in the quarry. The relative paid several men to search the water. They found a nylon sack that contained the dismembered body of a woman. The quarry was across the road from the police station. The police searched the quarry. In total, 10 nylon bags with the body parts of 9 women were found. Only one body wasn't dismembered. Some of the bodies were in advanced stages of decomposition, so the police weren't able to determine the cause of death. What is known is that at least one of them had been strangled to death, and none of them had been shot. The victims were ages 18 to 30. The police geolocated one of the victims' phones and discovered it was in the possession of 33-year-old Collins Jumaisi Khalusha. Khalusha worked as a motorcycle taxi driver. He lived in a rented room about 300 feet from where the bodies were dumped. 3 days after the bodies were found, Khalusha was arrested outside a bar where he went to watch a soccer game. When he was arrested, the police said he was trying to lure a woman back to his home. The police searched his home and found 10 cell phones and 24 SIM cards. They also found 8 ID cards, 6 were for men and 2 were for women. 12 sacks like the ones the bodies were found in, rope, gloves, and a machete were also found. The police said that Khalusha confessed to murdering 42 women over 2 years. He said the first victim was his wife. The last murder happened a day before the bodies were discovered. If Khalusha did kill 33 other women, their bodies have not been found. This includes the body of his wife. When the police announced Khalusha had been arrested, they called him a psychopath and a vampire. Khalusha's lawyer claimed that the confession was coerced. He said that Khalusha was tortured and strangled until he confessed. On August 20th, 2024, about a month after Khalusha was arrested, He and 12 other inmates escaped from the jail at the police station. They cut through a mesh ceiling in the yard and climbed through the hole. Then they scaled an exterior fence. It's believed that they had help from police officers. 5 officers were charged with helping the men escape, and they have yet to go to trial. Many people in Kenya have questioned if Khalusha is a serial killer or if the police framed him. Supposedly, Khalusha had been committing murders for 2 years and dumping the bodies in a quarry across the road from the police station. Yet the police had no idea a serial killer was at work. The 3 days after the bodies were found, they made an arrest and Khalusha confessed, but he claims the confession was coerced. Khalusha's neighbors said there was no way he could have killed dozens of women in his home, dismembered their bodies, and dumped them without any of them noticing anything unusual. People claim they were actually victims of the police who were cracking down on anti-government protesters. Before the bodies were found, there were protests advocating for the better treatment of women in the country, and there were protests against recent tax hikes. The police are still looking for Colin's Jumaisi Khalusha. They are offering what they call a significant reward for information leading to his capture. Number 2. Warren Luther Alexander. On May 29, 1977, the police of Port Hueneme, California, were called to a local motel. Port Hueneme is a small coastal city known for its surfing. In the motel room was the dead body of 18-year-old Kimberly Fritz. Fritz had been arrested several times for prostitution. The pathologist determined that Fritz had been strangled to death with a pair of pantyhose that was still wrapped around her neck. The police released a sketch of a man who was seen with Kimberly before she was murdered, but no arrests were made in the case. Valvadan Sanchez was a 31-year-old mother of 3. In the summer of 1977, she was separated from her husband. She was living in a motel in Oxnard, California. Oxnard surrounds Port Hueneme. On September 8, 1977, her dead body was found in the motel room where she lived. She had been strangled to death with a pair of pantyhose. When her body was found, the pantyhose was still wrapped around her neck. Just over 3 months later, on December 27, 1977, the dead body of 22-year-old Lorraine Ann Rodriguez was found under a bridge in rural Oxnard. Rodriguez was a married mother of 2. She also worked in the sex trade. Rodriguez was strangled with a bra that was wrapped around her neck. Her body was then pushed out of a moving car. The police immediately suspected that all the murders were connected. All 3 women, who were all killed within 7 months, were known sex workers, and they were strangled with a piece of clothing that was left wrapped around their necks. One notable difference was that the last victim, Lorraine Rodriguez, wasn't found murdered in a motel. Her body was dumped under a bridge. But Rodriguez lived in the same motel where Velvet Sanchez was living and had been murdered. Semen was found inside all 3 victims. No arrests were made in the 3 cases. Decades later, DNA profiles were made from all 3 semen samples. It proved what the police had long suspected: one man had committed all the murders. But they were unable to match the DNA to a suspect. Then in August 2024, nearly 47 years after the murders, the police announced that a match to the DNA had been found, and they were charging 73-year-old Warren Luther Alexander with the 3 murders. 2 years earlier, 2,400 miles from Ventura County, where the 3 murders were committed, the Srery County Sheriff's Office in North Carolina were investigating a decades-old cold case. On July 7, 1992, 15 years after the 3 women were murdered, the dead body of 29-year-old Nona Cobbs was found beside her guardrail on an overpass on Interstate 77 in Surrey County. She had been strangled to death. She was last seen alive the day before getting into a truck at a rest stop about 140 miles away from where her body was found. Cobb abused drugs and worked in the sex trade. In April 2021, a new DNA profile was built from the evidence from Cobb's murder. Then, experts used genetic genealogy to narrow down the suspect. It led them to 70-year-old Warren Luther Alexander, who lived in Diamond Head, Mississippi. Alexander was born in 1951 in California. In the 1950s and some of the 1960s, Alexander lived in the Oxnard area. But while he was in high school, he and his family moved 80 miles to Long Beach, California. Alexander graduated from high school in Long Beach in 1969. After that, he was an electrician in the Marine Corps. For most of Alexander's life, he worked as a long-haul truck driver. He only had a minor criminal record. Alexander had lived in Diamond Head for nearly 2 decades. His neighbors thought he was grumpy and short-tempered, but no one thought he was dangerous or secretly a murderer. Alexander loved to play golf, and he was a member of the country club. So when he was arrested in March 2022 for Nona Cobb's murder, many of his neighbors were shocked. After Alexander was arrested, a sample of his DNA was uploaded to CODIS. Then, 3 months later, in February 2023, the Ventura County Sheriff's Cold Case Unit reopened the 1977 murders of Kimberly Fritz, Velvet Sanchez, and Lorraine Rodriguez. They decided to submit the killer's DNA to CODIS again. Then they were notified that it was a match to Warren Alexander's DNA. When the police are notified that they have a DNA match in a cold case, the person is usually not arrested immediately. The investigators have to make sure that person was able to commit the murder. For example, if they were in jail or thousands of miles away at the time of the murder, there's probably an explanation as to why their DNA was a match, like cross-contamination, a clerical error, or some other type of mistake. So for the next year, they investigated Alexander, and they determined that in 1977, he lived in the Oxnard area. They also matched his fingerprints to fingerprints found at the scene. In August 2024, 73-year-old Warren Alexander was charged with the murders of Kimberly Fritz, Velvet Sanchez, and Lorraine Rodriguez. Alexander has pleaded not guilty to all 4 murders, and he's currently being held in Ventura County without bail. No trial date has been set. The police are also investigating to see if he committed any other murders. They think it's unlikely that he killed 3 women over 7 months in 1977, then committed another murder 15 years later, and then didn't kill any other women. But at the time of this recording, Warren Alexander has only been charged with 4 murders. Number 1. Gary Allen Srery. In 1975, 16-year-old Pauline Brazeau, who lived in Yorkton, Saskatchewan, Canada, gave birth to a daughter. In late 1975, Pauline was looking for a new start with her daughter. So she moved with her 7-month-old daughter and older sister to Calgary, Alberta, to live with her aunt. Pauline got a job as a waitress at an Italian restaurant about a block from her aunt's home. She told her employers she was 19 years old. On January 9, 1976, about a month after coming to Calgary, Pauline was hanging out at the restaurant with a relative and 2 friends. Around 3 a.m., Pauline left the restaurant by herself and started to walk home. Tragically, she never made it there. The next morning, around 9 a.m., the partially clad dead body of 16-year-old Pauline Brazeau was found beside a logging road outside of Cochrane, a city just over 20 miles northwest of Calgary. The 16-year-old mother had been sexually assaulted and stabbed to death. Tara Jean White was 18 years old and studying science at the University of Calgary. She was reported missing in early July 1976. The last time anyone saw Tara was in Calgary on July 1st, 1976. She was heading to Lake Louise, Alberta, where she had a summer job as a waitress. But she never made it to Lake Louise. The police surmised that she was kidnapped by someone who offered her a ride to the bus station, or someone who picked her up while she was hitchhiking to Lake Louise. 5 years later, Tara White's skeletal remains were found in a shallow grave about 37 miles outside of Calgary. A cause of death could not be determined. On August 5, 1976, the new dead body of a young woman was found in a ditch beside Highway 60 outside of Devon, Alberta. She had been sexually assaulted and strangled to death. She was identified as 17-year-old Marie Judy Gordeau. She was last seen 2.5 days earlier when she was visiting a friend in Edmonton. Marie lived on her family's farm in Beaumont, Alberta, which is about 15 miles from where her body was found. A few hours after she left her friend's home, her car was found abandoned and running. It was parked on the road about 4 miles from her home, and it was on the route she usually took home. Nothing appeared to have been stolen from the car. Her purse with money in it was still in the car. There were also no signs of a struggle. The police believe that Marie was stopped on the road and lured out of her car. There were no leads in the case, and no arrests were made. Dr. Brinda Sinha, a clinical psychologist at the University of Alberta, said that the murderer may kill again. In the spring of 1976, 20-year-old Melissa Rehorick moved from Windsor, Ontario to Calgary, Alberta. At the end of the summer, she was living at the WYCA in downtown Calgary. She got a job as a housekeeper. On September 16, 1976, she left her room at the YWCA. She told her roommate she planned on checking out some areas outside the city. She planned on hitchhiking. The next morning, Melissa's fully dressed body was found in a ditch beside a highway about 13.5 miles outside of Calgary. The cause of death was manual strangulation. 19-year-old Barbara McLean was also a recent transplant to Calgary. She was originally from Nova Scotia. In early 1977, Barbara was working at a bank. On the night of February 26, 1977, about 5 months after Melissa Rehorick was murdered, 19-year-old Barbara McLean went out to a bar with some friends and her boyfriend. At the end of the night, she argued with her boyfriend and decided to hitchhike home. About 6 hours later, her body was found in a remote area outside the city. She had been strangled to death. The Calgary police believe that one man killed all 5 women. In November 1981, there was a 3-day conference for homicide investigators in Alberta and the neighboring province, British Columbia. Over the past decade, there were 28 unsolved murders of young women in the 2 provinces. They met to discuss the cases and see if there are any connections between them. Members of the conference did think that the same man committed the murders of Tara White, Maria Godot, Melissa Rehorick, and Barbara McLean. But they thought the murder of Pauline Brazeau was too different. The other 4 women had been strangled, and their bodies were found next to highways. Pauline was stabbed to death, and her body was found near a logging road. But the police did believe that the man committed another murder. In May 1980, 19-year-old No Wang Ha came from Vietnam to Banff, Alberta, which is about 79 miles west of Calgary. Ha got a job as a chambermaid at a hotel. On February 26, 1981, Ha deposited her paycheck at a bank in downtown Banff. About 46 hours later, 19-year-old Nong Wang Ha was found lying face down beside the Trans-Canada Highway about 125 miles west of Banff. She had been strangled to death. The police thought she was connected to the other murders because she was strangled to death and found beside the highway. Also, all 5 women had worked at a hotel in Banff during the summer months. Pauline Brazeau had not. But the Calgary police weren't convinced that Pauline was another victim of the same man, so they investigated her murder as a part of the series of what they called the highway murders. A suspect emerged 13 years after Nong Wei Ka was murdered. On June 14, 1994, 14-year-old Tina McPhee was walking to school in Edmonton, Alberta. Edmonton is 186 miles from Calgary. Tina was last seen getting into a pickup truck. She then disappeared. The police soon narrowed in on a suspect, 34-year-old Gary Castocker. Months earlier, in February 1994, Castocker was released from prison after serving 11 years and 3 months for 2 sexual assaults. In 1982, he raped a 21-year-old woman and was sentenced to 7 years in prison. He was paroled in 1985. 3 years later, while still on parole, he drove a woman off the road. He beat her and attempted to rape her. Instead, he ripped her blouse and threatened to kill her if she told anyone about the assault. Castocker was sentenced to 4 years and 3 months in prison. While in prison, Castocker refused treatment for alcoholism and sexual deviancy. Castocker never applied for early parole. Nevertheless, the parole board reviewed his case and believed he was dangerous and would probably re-offend. Castocker was released in February 1994 after serving his entire sentence. Castocker was the stepfather of one of Tina's friends. He dropped off his stepdaughter at school minutes before Tina was seen getting into the truck. Castocker drove a truck similar to the one Tina was seen getting into. Castocker also didn't have an alibi for the time of the murder. He failed to show up for work that day and the following day. The police seized Castocker's truck. On June 29th, the police asked Castocker to come in the next morning for an interview. Hours before he was supposed to be interviewed, he was found hanging in the basement of his home. He was taken to the hospital and never regained consciousness. He was pronounced dead on July 5th. In March 1995, 10 months after Tina McPhee went missing, her body was found in a makeshift dump southeast of Edmonton. She had most likely been strangled or smothered. The police concluded that Castocker killed Tina, and they thought he may have killed other young women, including the victims of the highway murders. He went to jail in 1982, a year after Wang Nong Ha was killed. In 2003, the highway murder cases were reopened, and with DNA, the police connected 2 of the murders, Barbara McLean and Melissa Rahoric. But they did not find a match to the offender. Then in 2021, the Calgary Police and the Royal Canadian Mounted Police started to look at cold cases with DNA evidence to see if they could use genetic genealogy to solve them. In November 2023, the police made an arrest in one of the cases, the January 1976 murder of 16-year-old Pauline Brazeau. They had arrested 73-year-old Ronald James Edwards. Edwards had served prison time for attempting to murder a sex worker. In September 1989, he brought a sex worker to his home and forced her to perform sex acts at knife point. They fought, and the young woman was cut several times. She escaped by climbing out a second-story window and jumping to the ground. She broke both ankles and crushed a vertebrae, but she survived. Edwards was sentenced to 10 years in prison. Ronald James Edwards is scheduled to go to trial for Pauline's murder in March 2025. At the time, the police gave no other updates on the other 5 cases. Then in April 2024, the Alberta RCMP Historical Homicide Unit announced they had identified the killer of Melissa Rahoric and Barbara McLean, plus they had connected 2 other homicides to the same man. On February 15, 1976, the bodies of 2 teenage girls were found under an overpass outside of Calgary. They were identified as Eva Dvorak and Patricia McQueen, who were both 14. They were last seen together the night before, hitchhiking in downtown Calgary. The medical examiner could not determine the cause of death. So initially, their deaths weren't investigated as homicides, but instead they were considered sudden deaths. But there are no signs of something like drug overdose or alcohol poisoning that could have caused the deaths of two healthy 14-year-old girls. So the case remained open. The evidence from their case was examined for DNA and a profile was created. It was then matched to the then unknown individual who killed Melissa Rehorick and Barbara McLean. The murders of the four women had not previously been connected. Then genetic genealogy led the investigators to Gary Allen Srery. Srery was born in 1942 in Oak Park, a suburb of Chicago, Illinois. His family, which included two younger siblings, moved to California in the mid-1950s. In 1965, Srery, who was about 23, was convicted of rape in Los Angeles, but it's unclear if he spent any time in prison. The following year, he was arrested for kidnapping and assault to commit rape. He was sent to a psychiatric hospital. He spent less than 3 years in the hospital. In 1969, Srery was again charged with rape, but at trial he was acquitted. A short time later, he was convicted of drug possession and he served several years in prison. In 1973, Srery was arrested in Florence, Oregon for kidnapping and sodomy, but the charges were ultimately dismissed. In 1974, Srery was arrested again for rape in Los Angeles. He was released on bail and fled the area. He then illegally entered Canada. Less than 2 years later, Eva Dvorak and Patsy McQueen were killed. 6 months after that, Melissa Rehorick was murdered, and then 5 months after that, Barbara McLean was killed. Srery was never considered a suspect in any of the cases. In 1979, Srery moved from Calgary to Vancouver, British Columbia. Between 1996 and 2008, he lived in different cities in British Columbia. In 2008, Srery was convicted of a violent sexual assault in New Westminster, British Columbia. He served 5 years in prison. He was then deported back to the United States. In 2008, 65-year-old Gary Srery was arrested for raping, beating, and strangling a 44-year-old woman in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. She survived, but suffered a stroke afterward that left her with disabilities. In September 2009, Srery was sentenced to life in prison. In 2024, when Gary Srery's DNA was linked to the murders of the four women, he could not be charged. He died in April 2011 at age 68 from natural causes. The police believe there's a good chance Srery had other victims. The police did not say if he was a suspect in the murders of Tara White, Marie Gardeau, and Wayne Noka. But after 48 years, the police consider the murders of Eva Dvorak, Patricia McQueen, Melissa Rehorick, and Barbara McLean closed. Thank you so much for watching today's video. We just want to remind you we started a channel membership where half the funds will go to solve a cold case. For more information, click on the video that's on the screen now. Well, that's all for today. Thanks again for watching.